Hi, welcome back to the free drawing lessons sponsored through Tortilla Library. Today we're going to pick up on where we left off on shading and learn how to set up a still life, how to make a blending stump, and hopefully these things will be giving you some progress and learning how to draw. When setting up a still life, you want to make sure that you have a direct light source so that you have strong cast shadows from the objects and on the objects. You also want to make sure that after you set it up, that you use a viewfinder. This is an old mat. You could use a smaller mat for a viewfinder. It can go different directions based on how you want your finished still life to look. You want to pick objects perhaps that relate to each other. Sometimes people tell a story when they're putting together a still life. So say if I put this object here, it's kind of low. And another object here. Sometimes people put several pieces of fruit in with their still life. But for this to be this low and this high, it just does not have a real good composition. Something needs to be here. So now I don't know if my viewfinder will work, but this in here gives a lot more height and will make a lot more interesting composition. You could put a few more things in, or you can just be simple like this. But the thing is that you want to make sure that you have a strong light source, so you have some strong shadows on your objects, strong shadows on your cloth. It's nice to put a cloth for a background. It could be a different color. It could be even a pattern cloth. You could have a pattern cloth on the bottom, plain one on the background. Then you want to take a pencil and you're going to gauge, I've grabbed a pen, but you can use either one, to gauge with sighting, the height of objects. So say you drew a line down the middle, you want to measure with your arms straight out, and then you bring I'll have to step back to do it in reality, but then I'll be off the camera. But anyway, from the last video I explained how to do that, and then you measure so that you get the right proportions of this in comparison to this, and maybe even the width of it in comparison to the size of the book. So those things are very important. You want to make sure that you can use sighting also to gauge the angle. So the angle of that book there, I'm closing one eye and I'm measuring, gauging this angle, so then I put this angle on my piece of paper when I'm drawing. You may want to start by drawing the negative shapes around. So say you have your frame, and then there's a negative shape between your frame and the edge of the vase. So you can draw that shape, which is an abstract shape. Then it helps you to get the proper shape of a vessel like that. It's very important to not just look at your paper while you're drawing, but keep looking at your objects, back and forth between your objects and your paper, because you're trying to capture what you see. So that's very important. Last time I was erasing with an eraser like this, and you may wonder what it was that I was using, and I forgot to explain it. It's called a kneaded eraser, and it can be stretched. Once it gets softened up, you can stretch it and reform it, and all the graphite goes on the inside and kind of gets eaten up. It disappears. You can push it pull it out to a point if you're trying to erase in just a tiny little area. It's actually the best kind of eraser that you can get. When you buy it, it's in a little rectangular shape, wrapped in plastic, and then you take off the plastic, of course, and then you have to kind of work it to get it to look more like this. This might even be two of them combined together. I've had this for a long time. They last and last and last. If they get hard, you just need to kind of soften them up, warm them up, and then they can be pliable again. So you want to make sure that when you're drawing your still life that you use a wide range of values in your objects so that when you draw, it's going to stand out. You don't want to have a white vase on a white book and so forth, because it won't show up if you have white cloth. So when you include your different objects, you want to make sure that you have strong contrast of values. So say here I have a very dark book on a light cloth. If I had a darker cloth, then I would want to have a lighter book. So you want to have good contrast of values in your objects, in your background, so that everything stands out more. And then when you have a strong light source, then the values are also going to be nice contrast with the background. When you start shading, you could shade from light to dark or dark to light, however you prefer. I prefer to go from light to dark because if I make a mistake, then I can erase it. Once you start shading very darkly, it's very hard to erase it. Lighter shading works much better to start with that. But before you even start shading, you're going to draw your objects like I showed you in the last video. You start with your ellipses. So there's an ellipse here, an ellipse here, an ellipse here, and you want it, and up here, and here. So you want to get those in place, draw them lightly, draw your sides lightly, and get everything in the way you like it. Once you've drawn everything, then you can go back in and darken some of your lines. But double check to make sure that everything is the way you like it, because if you get it all done and you find out, oh, I should have moved this over this way a little bit more, I should have taken out a plum because 3 is a better combination, it's hard to erase afterwards. So you want to just double check before you start darkening your lines and shading. So once you get it all laid out, before you start shading, take a break from it, walk away from it, and look at it again with a fresh eye. That will give you a chance to see whether or not you need to make any adjustments. Okay, after looking through the viewfinder, which is a mat at this point, I noticed stepping back, taking a little break and stepping back, which is good to do. I noticed that these 3 plums were too close together and you couldn't see any separation. So it might have been better to have a larger one and then a couple smaller ones so that you see a little gap in between, because the negative space in between is just as important as the positive space of the objects. And again, they make a pattern. When you have the circles of the plums, it becomes a pattern. The patterns on the vase here also make for a more interesting composition. Then you have the patterns of all of the dried flowers. So this keeps your eye engaged in the composition. You want to make sure that you have good contrast, good patterns, and when you're drawing, when you start to take your piece of paper and you draw your border, to make sure you get everything in proportion, you want to draw a little notch here, center, and here, center, and here, center, and here, center. And it kind of gives you an idea when you have your format over it. It gives you an idea of where to start drawing so that you don't, say, for example, draw this too large. You don't want this to be the full length of the paper. The same with the vase. You want to make sure that you get things in proportion to the size of your paper. If you're working from a photograph, one of the things that you can do is you can take, say this is, I'll fold this in half, say this is your photograph, and you want to make sure it's the exact same size when you make it larger. You take a straight edge and you go from corner to corner. Let me put this here so I can hold on to it. You go from corner to corner, and then you draw your line out to here. If your paper is this size, you cut it off right there. If your paper is this size, you cut it off right there. So that way this photo would be enlarged to the right proportions on your piece of paper. That can be very valuable when you're trying to enlarge something. Okay, so many times people will do a still life. It tells a story. You could do a cluster of antique children's toys. And if I was going to do that, I might pick this little old block, this little wooden block. Now, when you look at the front of the block, it's a square. But if you look at it at an angle in the front corner, you might be able to see the top and the two sides. So this is drawing in perspective. And the same with the book. You see, perhaps in the camera you can see this corner, and then it goes away from you in two directions. Versus if the book was straight on, then these sides, you know the sides are straight. This is straight, this is straight, this is straight. But when you're looking at it like this, sitting on a table, the sides tend to go in a little bit in perspective. Kind of like when you're looking at railroad tracks. At the end of the railroad tracks, they all get, further away they go, the closer they look like they're getting, but you know that they're not closer together. They're the same space the whole length of the railroad tracks. So what I want to show you is how to draw an object like this in perspective, and how to draw a book in perspective. Okay, I wanted to show you, before we get started on drawing a book in 3-dimension, I wanted to show you a couple other still lifes. This one's by Caravaggio, Basket of Fruit, and you can see perhaps there's a lot of texture in the basket and texture in the leaves, and a lot of patterns in the basket, patterns in the grapes and the fruit. So these are some of the things that you want to think about when you're doing a still life. And here's one by Pizarro, Still Life Apples and Pears. Again, a basket with patterns. There's patterns also in the wallpaper in the background. And then a lot of people like to do still lifes with flowers. Flowers all by themselves, flowers laying on a table, flowers in a vase. And here you can see there's quite a few patterns on the tablecloth and the vase itself, plus the patterns in all of the leaves here, and then in the petals of the flowers. And then I wanted to show you one more that's in this book from the library, and it's by it's The Life and Art of Paul de Longpre. And here's another one of a still life of a basket of flowers, and again you can see all the patterns of the petals of the flowers and the basket. So when you're putting together a composition like this, you want to think of the negative space on the outsides of the objects that you're drawing. Okay, so when you're looking at the front of a block or the front of a book, you see a flat form. And those are called shapes, a flat shape. So, for example, you have a circle as a flat shape, But then, like one of your homework assignments was to shade a sphere, then it becomes three-dimensional. And then you have a square. But then when you start shading, you turn it a little bit so you can see the corner, and you start shading, then it becomes three-dimensional. Then there's a triangle. And if you shade it, then you end up having a cone. And then there's a rectangle can be shaded to look like a cylinder. And the triangle can also be, instead of curved at the bottom, can have straight edges, and then you have a pyramid. So all of these shapes, these three basic shapes, are in nature everywhere. You can see that this and also the rectangle could be parts of a tree, trunks of a tree. And this part here is basically sort of the shape of the leaves of a tree. But you don't want it to be perfectly circular because then it gets to be too boring. And then pine trees have sort of a triangular shape, but then again, you don't want it to be perfect triangle shape. You want it to have a little bit of variations on both sides. You draw a line down the middle of your shape in nature, and both sides should be different to have show more interest. Okay, so what you need to do is start with a horizon line. The horizon line is where your eyes are. So if you're sitting down in a chair looking at a book on a table, your eye level line is going to be lower than if you're standing. So say I'm going to put my eye level line right here, and you want it to be perfectly straight with the top of your paper. And then you're going to have two what's called vanishing points. I'm going to put one here and one here. And I'm going to label them VP for vanishing point. So what you want to do is start with the corner of your object, whether or not it's a block, and you see the corner, or a book. So we're going to put the corner, a straight line right here, and then the top and bottom of your corner go to the vanishing point. And this is one thing that many students have a difficulty in. So I'm not going to draw the whole line very darkly all the way to the vanishing point, because the edges of the book don't go that far. And the way you tell how far it's going to go is by sighting. I showed you about sighting, where you put your arm straight out, you put the top of your pencil point at the edge, and then you bring your thumb down to the bottom edge. So then I can use this to gauge how far my book is on the paper. So I'm drawing my book a lot smaller, so I just want to show you. So say I'm going to stop the edge of my book right there, and then the top goes to the other vanishing point. And then what you can do is just, these parts that stick out can be more dotted lines. And so say I'm going to say this part of the book is a little shorter, and maybe the front of my book has a curve. So it makes it look more like a book, and then the pages might even curve a little bit right there. So then, what do you do with the top part of the book? How does that work? So you take this one, and instead of it going back to that again, this corner goes over here to this side. So we line it up, and then this corner goes to that vanishing point. So then, these are the extra lines that you can erase with your kneaded eraser. And I'm using a very dark pencil, so it's not going to erase real well. But you can get an idea of how to make a book look like it's laying on a table, because most students, when they draw a book, they end up making it look like this. It looks like it's standing straight up on a table instead of laying on the table, because they haven't realized that these corners go off in perspective. So here's just a small example. Here are a couple other books. Here's one laying down. Here's one open. Here's with just the book cover open. Here's where the whole book is open. And what you need to remember is that the far edges of your drawing, of your book, are going to be shorter than your close edges. So this is shorter than this. This is shorter than this. This whole length is shorter than this length. But if you look at here, that's the same length as that. And that's why it makes it look like it's standing up. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that first you have a corner, and then the top and bottom of the corners go off to the vanishing point, and then the top here goes off in the opposite direction, and then this one goes off in the opposite direction. And then if you shade it, so say this is the cover, you can shade it, and then it starts to look more three-dimensional. Okay? So this is something I would like you to do for a homework exercise. I would like you to set up a book on a table and sit down and draw it in perspective, starting with the corner. So you have to make sure when it's, you don't need to do an open book, because it's a lot harder with an open book, but have it so that the corner is towards you, not the edge. So if the corner's towards you, then the sides will look like they taper off in to the vanishing points. So you start with a corner and draw them to the vanishing point, the top and bottom, and the same again. And then the tricky part is to remember that this corner goes off this way and this corner goes off that way. This from here to there. Okay, so there's that. And then you can apply that same information for drawing a plain old cube, which could be transferred into, say, a house or a shed or a barn. So you start again with the first corner line, and then you draw the top and bottom to the vanishing points on the horizon line. You have to determine if the horizon line is above the building, through the building, or below the building, like way down here. It just depends on if you're standing or sitting or laying down when you're drawing your buildings. So then again, you go across, and then you figure out by sighting where the sides of the building are. And then you take the top, and you can go across, like they did, like it's here, go across, and across that way. Then you get the cube. And then for the roof, you might say, well, how high do I make the peak? What you want to do is you draw an X from here to here, straight across, and from here to here. And then you find the center point here, and you go straight up through the X, and you can use sighting to figure how high the point will be. But you know it's going to be in the center if you've gone across here, and then through the center. Then that is where your peak will be, as in this example here. Then you can erase all your extra lines in the background. Then you have what could be a shed, could be a barn, it could be the beginning of a house in 3-dimension, which many people, when they're first learning to draw, they draw a house and it looks just like they did in grade school. They don't realize that it's flat when it's like that. If you're looking at the front of the house and say your vanishing point is right here, your horizon line is right here, and your vanishing point's here, then the sides of the house would go to that vanishing point. And then you could decipher by sighting again how long the house is. The peak of the roof also goes to the vanishing point. I need to make it a little bit longer. And then this edge of the roof is parallel to this edge. That's another mistake that many students make. So you come out to about there, and the roof is usually a little bit further than the side of the building. And then you erase your extra lines. And then you can erase the horizon line that's going through the house. And then you have a house in 3-dimension. Okay, now I want to explain how, when you're drawing a house or a book, a little bit more about shading. There's hatching, which is similar to cross hatching, but hatching is just lines that are not crossed. And then there's blending, and you could blend with a tissue, paper towel, or you can blend with a blending stump or tortilla. I can show you briefly how to make one, but there's some really great videos, so I don't want to take the time to roll one, but there's some great videos to show you how to make these. You can just search it online. And then there's stippling, which is dots. And then one that's not covered here is contour lines. So say you're shading something that is round, say you want to do something that's round, you're going to do curved hatching, so to speak. So then it gives the impression more that it is a circular object, unless compared to have straight lines for your shading, for your hatching lines. And then here's an example of hatching with straight lines on a sphere, scumbling, which we talked about before, stippling with the dots, cross-hatching, which you did for a homework assignment, and blending or smudging, which could be with a paper towel or tissue or a blending stump. If you use your fingers, which everyone's tempted to do, there's oil in our fingers, and then you can end up having smudges that you really have a tough time getting rid of. You can actually use scumbling, along with all these other ones, to do a whole drawing. Here's a figure, all done with scumbling, and here's a cup, kind of like a still life in a way, all done with scumbling. So one thing you want to make sure that you do is you use a wide range of values. So here is a value scale that shows all the way from no pencil lines whatsoever to very lightly shaded, all the way through to black. The trouble is, when people do a drawing, they use just these, and they forget to get into the darker ones. When your drawing is just with these, it's very flat. It doesn't look like it's finished. But then when you start getting darker, really dark, in the shadowed areas, then it starts to come to life. It looks three-dimensional. It looks more realistic. So that's another thing you want to keep in mind. And so then this is a couple value scales. This one's done only with scumbling. And then this one's done with cross-hatching. And then at the very end, just hatching. So you can see both are from dark to light. So it's quite a bit of a variety of shades that you can get, but you want to make sure that you try to get as dark as you can and also have a wide value range so that your drawings look more realistic. As you can see again in this one here, there's a wide range from very, very, very darks to white to different grays in between, and the same with this one. There's just a little bit of scumbling here, more here, and a lot more here. So you get the three-dimensional look there. So how you make a tortillon or tortillon, or however you say it, I've tried to figure out how to say it, and I looked online and there's 3 different ways to say it. So what you want to do is you take a piece of paper and you take about 1 inch down from the top. This is a regular printer paper. 1 inch down from the top and 1 inch up from the bottom, and draw a straight line across and cut it in half, and then you have enough paper for 2 to make. And then you start rolling with just this little point, and you start rolling really tight. You can maybe use a toothpick to get it started, and you keep rolling and rolling and rolling, trying to keep it very tight. And then when you're done, you take a paintbrush, maybe a little bit bigger than this one, and you shove it through until it pushes it out to gets it to a point. And this one didn't quite get tight enough at the end, or turn to a nice point, because I didn't have the right size paintbrush when I made this one, but you get the idea. Then you put a piece of tape on it, and you can use this to be blending just like you would with a paper towel. And when you get it to a nice point, you're able to blend in tiny little places if you wanted to. Whereas when you're using something like this, it's hard to get into little teeny areas. So that's one of the advantages of having a blending stump. You can also buy these, but if you want to save money, you can make your own. You can use newspaper also. I've made them with newspaper. You can also use a little sandpaper to clean it up if you want. You can snip the end off to clean it up. But what a lot of people like to do is they make 3 or 4 or 5 of these, and they have 1 or 2 for light areas and blending, 1 or 2 for medium gray areas, and then 1 or 2 for really dark areas. That way they don't have to keep cleaning them up and making new ones. So what I'd like for you to do for homework is to draw a book in 3D with the 2-point perspective, and draw a cube for the base of a building, and then draw the X across, and actually do it so you can see the corner, like I had in that other example. So it looks like it's the corners this way, and you're going off into 2-point perspective. Draw your X across one side, come up for the peak, and finish a roof. So that's your homework for this next time, and I hope you've enjoyed the lesson. If you have any questions, give me a call or an email.